and welcome to OpenLine Online this Sunday morning, November 24th. It's about 45 degrees outside, and it's a little rainy. And, of course, as we are on your WBLS YouTube page, you can interact with us live by going to WBLS 1075 NYC to interact. Bobby Childs, myself, we will read your comments.
Just by the way,
yes, sir.
The fact that you told them the only way they could hear us is if they were already there. So they already got that they were there, right? But they can still interact with us.
Oh, yes,
I know you still think you're on the radio side.
Yeah,
no. Side.
But I tell, but you got to realize that. See, he doesn't realize that we gain new listeners every week. True. You understand? Oh, young folks have these in their hand and they can interact. But anyway, we have some special guests here that is joining us in the studio. I'm going to introduce them, but let me introduce our panel first. First, let me introduce former judge, New Jersey attorney, Bob Pickett. Good morning, Bob. How are you?
Good morning, Fatim, and good morning to all the folks out there as well.
Bob, your mic. They didn't hear one word you said.
Okay, good morning, Fatim, and good morning to all the good folks out there watching and listening to us as we talk about the issues that are important to them.
And you talk about somebody on the radio side? Okay. Let me ring that bell. All right. Right next to him is, I call him Brother Protest. That's out of love and respect for what this brother does. And he will fill us in a little later about what took place last night. He was at a fantastic event with Professor Cornel West. And that's Brother Larry Ham. Good morning, Brother Larry.
Good morning. I'm glad to be here this morning. I'm glad to be back from Gallman, Mississippi.
There you go. Also, one half of the sports brother is Bobby Childs. Good morning, Bobby.
Good morning, all. Thank you all for tuning in on this wet Sunday morning here in New York City.
There you go. And we also have journalist Nitha Khan, who is in studio today. Good morning, Nitha.
Good morning. Good to be back. Sorry, I was on a little 2-week hiatus, so it was needed, but it's good to be back.
Sounds good. And our special guest, and I'm going to leave the drum roll for our latter guest, because she is returning due to the folks' request for her to return. But I'm first going to introduce, sitting right next to me is Brother Mark Morial, President and CEO of the National Urban League and former mayor of New Orleans from 1994 to 2002. Good morning, Brother Mark.
Good morning, and good to be with the panel. Good to be with everyone who's tuned in.
Sounds good. And as I gave this young lady who hung out last night at the Will Downing and Gladys Knight concert, boy, did we have a great time. And that is Lola Adeshoye.
Adeshoye.
Adeshoye. I got it?
Adeshoye.
Oh, Adeshoye.
Shoye, yeah.
Instead of Shay, show. Okay,
exactly.
I got that mentioned. Yeah, I'm sorry. Adeshoye. I won't make that mistake no more. She is a British Nigerian New York. No, I won't. No, British Nigerian New York based writer, commentator, and broadcaster. She has been published in the New Statesman, the Huffington Post, and the Sunday New York Times, and she's been seen on the BBC, MSNBC, and Al Jazeera, just to mention a few. Good morning.
Hi, Lola.
And Adeshoye.
Yes, that's
Brother
it.
Bobby.
There you go. I appreciate that, man.
I'm so glad
go.
that she's here and I'm here because we always miss each other.
Yeah, we
and
do.
we're always texting and we're always, hanging out. Well,
Now we're
celebrating
together.
somebody's birthday, yes.
Well, after this little back and forth here, now we can start.
Don't hate
We
me,
do have a life here. Sorry, we don't have no R&B this week for you. You know, the folks enjoyed the R&B last week, but we're gonna get into some of the news that has taken place this week, and we're gonna start with the 2020 Democratic candidates with the debate that took place in Atlanta at the Tyler Perry Studios. Brother Mark, you was there.
I had the opportunity to attend the debate, which took place at Tyler Perry Studios. An impressive facility, the largest movie-making facility in the United States, east of California, and lots of love and respect for Tyler Perry, who I might add is a native of New Orleans, who's found his great success, certainly as a resident of Atlanta. And it was a very strong attendance by elected officials, civil rights leaders, Stacey Abrams, Andrew Young, the mayor of Atlanta, of course, Keisha Lance Bottoms, myself, Reverend Sharpton, Kristen Clark of the Lawyers Committee, Melanie Campbell of the National Coalition for Black Civic Participation. She was there, along with Derek Johnson of the NAACP, and those are the leaders I saw. I saw Roland Martin for a second. So there was a strong, if you will, in-studio presence by leaders from our community. My assessment of the debate, I always ask myself, will what happens on this stage change, influence, or alter people's minds? The second thing I would say, it's difficult in a debate with 10 people. It's hard sometimes to catch and to follow the narrative. Thirdly, I thought for the most part, all of the candidates did a credible job in responding, in seeking to impress. But fourthly, we pushed them in advance by way of a letter, by way of an open letter, and by way of a statement to address housing issues, to address gentrification, to address the racial wealth gap, and to address K through 12 education. So you saw a bit of conversation about housing, some of the candidates talking about gentrification or their housing plans, because I think the discussion has been too hyper-focused on health care, which is an important issue, but it's not the only, if you will, domestic issue. We've got income inequality, we've got criminal justice reform, we've got voter suppression, we've got K through 12 education, we've got this broader thing about who can lead the nation with a changing demographic and a changing globalization frame, who can address those issues, who can move the ball. So I thought it was a positive debate, but I want to see a sharper conversation about the issues that urban communities and communities of color and people for whom civil rights and social justice is key are clued in on. Now, many of the candidates will tell us, well, look at my website. They may say, look at what I've published. And there are a number of position papers that are out there. Maybe this is really for the moderators who are doing the asking of questions. Maybe we've got to put more focus on them and more focus on what they ask so that it's not a repetitive ad nauseum, that they're not simply repeating what I call news cycle questions. Yes, impeachment is critical. Yes, K through 12 education is critical. Yes, the issue in the Middle East. But I want to hear foreign policy conversation about Latin America, Caribbean, and Africa. I don't want to just hear foreign policy conversation about the Middle East, Europe, and Asia. I want someone who demonstrates an understanding. Well, these debates are not ferreting that out. And I think that to the extent that there are future debates and the field narrows, we're going to do more to put pressure on what ought to be talked about, what has not been talked about to the level and to the extent necessary as the debates go forward. But, you know, the Democratic candidates are as Democratic candidates are. They're not going to throw too hard of punches at each other. They're going to, to some extent, dance around and do what I call light jabs at each other. And I always wonder if, look, this is a campaign, and campaigns are rough and tumble, if a rougher and sharper conversation would be better received by people. Some people say, I don't want to see them fighting each other. I tend to think I want to see sometimes who's tough, who's strong. Sharp differences are okay. It's okay as long as it's not below the belt personal attacks.
Let me just bring this up real quick. So the next day, Reverend Sharpton and his National Action Network had a Southeast Regional Conference down there. And who attended? You had Senator Cory Booker. You had billionaire activist Tom Steyer. You had entrepreneur Andrew Yang. You had Mayor Pete Buttigieg. And you had Senator Amy Klobuchar there, in a sense of speaking to the black community. And when I say the black community, and this is why I wanted to jump in on this one, Brother Mark, is you talk about the moderators and you would like to hear more about certain things dealing with Latin America. More people of color wants to hear more about our issues. And it's nice that the Urban League and Reverend Sharpton, but maybe the influence that you as civil rights organizations have, maybe it's time to put on a forum. Maybe it is at Tyler Perry. Maybe it's not that Tyler.
Exactly.
Somewhere that you put it together
Yep.
that this will be broadcast
Yep.
and bring TV One and BET together and broadcast this out to Black America and open up a place where we can come to and these candidates can be questioned, because it says, if you look at the Iowa poll, it says that Pete Buttigieg has moved up and is leading, right? But if the new poll comes out and saying in the Black community, in the overall poll, he's polling at 0. So none of these Democratic candidates will win this presidential election without the Black vote. And if they alienate the Black vote, and we've seen what happened with Hillary Clinton in the last election. So if they don't start talking and start throwing and continue to throw us crumbs, there's going to be a problem with the Black vote.
Right. So to your recommendation, your thought, and your idea, we have been in some discussions about doing that. Whether it will materialize is going to be based on some factors like resources, et cetera.
Okay.
But we have been in discussion. Now, truthfully, 9 of the candidates came to the National Urban League Conference in Indianapolis.
Yes.
A number of them came to the National Action Network. Several went to the NAACP.
Correct.
That's not the same as a high-profile televised conversation. I think you're absolutely right. We need a conversation which may be narrowly focused on those issues, and it needs to be as high profile as any of the others. Suffice it to say, I'll leave it as saying it's something we're working on. I've got my fingers crossed that we could pull something off. It's not something that's been lost or certainly dismissed. But one thing I will say, in all fairness, having watched presidential politics and having been involved in presidential politics, really back to the Jackson '84 campaign, where I was a 20-something-year-old delegate and part of Jackson's campaign. I think in this Democratic cycle, these candidates have been much more forthcoming than before in reaching out, in soliciting, in connecting with the African American community. It was not, we had to pull no teeth to get them to come to the Urban League. They've been more responsive than in the past, and hopefully that's the beginning, and it's not just drive-by politics that we sometimes receive. So this is a continuing effort. You are absolutely right. There's got to be a focus on turning out the African American vote. But I also want people to understand that we faced in 2016 an active, well-funded, highly orchestrated campaign run by the Russians, which told our people, don't vote. Do not vote. To suppress, their suppression was what I call psychological suppression.
Right.
Using the KGB tactics in the United States to discourage people from voting with all sorts of excuses. So we've got to be aware that we want to put pressure, but we've got to be committed to participating in the process.
I think you alluded to it when in your opening statement. More pressure has to be put on the media hosts of these debates. The media hosts and the Democratic, in collaboration with the Democratic National Committee, are framing each debate. That's right. And you got to put the pressure on and say, look, you know, we need discussion of these issues also. The other issues are not the only issues. These are some. So I think you have to direct that, whoever the media hosts are going to be, and the Democratic National Committee, they are in conjunction with each other, framing each debate, agreeing upon what questions and what issues are going to be asked. Then the other thing is that the debates are in some ways short-circuited by this impeachment. I mean, I think there's no way to get around the fact that the show in town now have been the impeachment hearings. And by the time people get at night to the Democratic debate, a lot of people aren't tuning in. They're just not tuning in.
Tuned in during the day.
Because they've tuned in during the day. They heard it on the radio. The average person can only take so much.
Yeah.
Talking of the Russian interference, Fiona Hill, who gave her testimony this week, she said that there's evidence that Russia is going to do the same thing in 2020. So that is something that we have to be very, very mindful of, and especially how they use technology. And then talking about what you're saying about candidates and, you know, not having to drag people in to talk about black stuff, I think that's good. I think it's really important. I think that they are more aware of, you know, issues relating to minorities. But at the same time, I don't think they're going far enough. And I don't understand that, because I think, okay, I get it. You want to appeal to everyone, and you want to also appeal to white working class and the middle class and so on. But if we're the ones that tip the vote, then we need to be a focal point, and not just as a kind of like, oh, we get it, you know, the demographics are changing, but as actual policy positions.
So let me
I
give
agree.
people some information that we all ought to grasp. And so African American voters in 2016 were 26% of all Democratic primary voters. So think about it in these terms. 26% of the coalition that a Democratic candidate would need to build in a general election, meaning 1 out of every 4 voters, right, may be a vote from African Americans. And because African Americans have historically voted 90% plus for Democrats. Look, we just had a governor's race in Louisiana, and the Democratic candidate was able to prevail. One of the reasons why he was able to prevail, John Bel Edwards is a moderate to conservative Democrat, is because he got 95% of the African American vote, and the African American vote overperformed relative to the primary. So in the primary, 26% of all votes cast in the Louisiana governor's race were from blacks. In the runoff, 30% were from African Americans. And so to your point, we will hold our turnout, our enthusiasm will hold the key to Pennsylvania, to Michigan, to Wisconsin with the vote in Milwaukee and other communities, without question. In Virginia, in North Carolina, if Georgia's going to be in play because of all of the suppression, because of Stacey Abrams' candidacy, if Georgia's going to be in play, it's going to be because of a strong African-American and millennial and zennial vote and participation. So I would agree with you fully. I think you're making an excellent point, and we have to continue the pressure. And this is a great place to elevate the conversation. And those of you all are listening, we've got to put the pressure. And to you, yes, on the moderators, yes, on CNN, yes, on MSNBC, yes, on those who are going to be organizing these debates. But I'm hopeful, Fatine, that we can pull our own, if you will, conversation off.
And I didn't even know anything
That would be
about
amazing.
this, but I just felt that
I
as
didn't
you were
want-
speaking, I was saying, wait a minute,
'Cause
this
it's
makes
not
sense.
certain.
Right.
Yeah, I was in discussions this past week and trying to nail down a media partner, trying to nail down the resources we need, because you need a place to do it. You've got some production expenses associated with it, but stay tuned.
Gotcha.
So there's a couple of comments out here, right? Because it definitely got our viewers because they're passionate about things. So one says, Edward Latson, you can't blame the Russians for anything the DNC was not doing for blacks. All the Russians said was the truth. The DNC should not have screwed Bernie in 2016, and more blacks would have voted. You got DB4A, no damn Russian told me not to vote or how to vote. Strong-minded people weren't fooled by any Russian BS. Again, Hillary lost because she was a terrible candidate to nominate.
It's important for people to understand we're not talking about why Hillary lost. Forget about losing and winning.
Exactly.
It's about the idea, and I want people to read The State of Black America, and I want them to focus on what the Russians did. You didn't know that it was the Russians.
Exactly.
The Russians posed as black activists.
You can see them online if you go
And
online.
they said, I'm a black activist, and my name is Louisa Haynes, and I'm telling you not to vote. They didn't say I'm a Russian.
Right, exactly.
They said, I'm a black activist. And so people need to take the scales off their eyes and understand this is not about winning and losing. This is about the principle of a foreign government
Having a
using
hand.
KGB tactics and saying, I'm going to suppress the African American vote.
But it's also about the enemy within.
Thank
and the
you.
enemy within has been white racist voter suppression even before the election of 2016.
sure.
It's what's being done at state houses through voter
question.
purging. It's what's being done in the legislatures across the country restricting the right to vote to people. It's what's being done even within the parties themselves. I just had this discussion with someone when I was in not in Louisiana, when I was in Mississippi. They were saying the party, and when they meant the party, the Democratic Party, they saying the party is not putting money at the base for people to do door-to-door work, door-to-door voter registration, and canvassing. So while we talk about that other stuff, we can't forget Chris Kobach and what he was trying to do, and the commission that Trump put together to try to suppress the black vote.
It is a triple threat of voter suppression. On one hand, there are state legislatures and actors and players who've passed laws. It's all documented in the State of Black America report. Secondly, there's the Supreme Court, which gutted the Voting Rights Act, which green-lit voter purges, which allowed big money to come into it. And then thirdly, it's the Russians. So what we see is all of these players appear to be acting in concert to impact and diminish black voter participation. And it is a orchestrated, well-funded scheme to do it. And I don't care. I'm not talking about Democratic politics. I'm not talking about Republican politics. I'm talking about just the fundamental principle that suppressing our votes, which is tantamount to reintroducing post-Reconstruction grandfather clauses, literacy tests, and all sorts of things that prevented people from voting. And so we've got to resist it on all scores, independent of a mindset of who it benefits or who it doesn't benefit, because it impacts not only presidential elections, it impacts that city council election. It impacts those races in those states where we elect judges. To your point, Louisiana, the race that just took place, one of the main changes in Louisiana in the second primary in the governor's race, the Urban League, the National Urban League and the Urban League of Louisiana ran a door-to-door campaign in New Orleans and Baton Rouge and Shreveport and what we call the river parishes, a nonpartisan campaign, which said we want people to wake up and go vote. And that was, the message was simple. If you care about health care, you care about education, you care about equal economic opportunity. And we did that independent of a candidate, independent of a party. It was a nonpartisan voter education and registration effort. And that is exactly, people need to understand you're not going to turn out the vote with Twitter and Facebook alone. Right. You have to get into the communities. There needs to be an old school mindset about how we do this. It's got to be reintroduced. And to those who don't want to do that, they're destined to fail.
One quick question, and this is a question I don't know the answer, but it seems like Senator Obama at the time when he was running for president, it seems like he utilized some of the new tactics in the sense of social media.
Yes.
Yeah? But he also used the old tactics. And I thought that, and I'm not here to criticize Hillary Clinton, but I thought that when she got beat at this game, that she knew that when she came back to run again, that she would utilize some of this strategy. And it comes to her that she didn't use some of this strategy.
They acted like they never got the memo. Wow. They never understood what President Obama did. Senator Barack Obama's 2008 campaign was the most innovative and the most brilliant presidential campaign run in modern times because of what you said, Fatim. He blended new and old together, and he also had a message that energized and appealed to people. That is one of the, and people have only studied, the mainstream media has thought it was only technology. They didn't understand it was his ground game. His ground game was significant. Look at all the young people who were involved in his ground game as volunteers and door knockers all across. What he did, he elevated to a national level what all of us who've run in city politics have done, and that is focus on door-to-door, grassroots, voter engagement, constituency engagement, in the neighborhoods to talk to voters and not simply rely on what I call electronic campaigns.
Correct.
And he also wasn't burdened by a primary with 25 candidates in it. This is the other thing that is bedeviling the Democrats. Not only did we have 25 candidates running, now we have entrants coming in at the 12th hour.
26.
Bloomberg, Patrick Duvall, Eric Holder is talking about he's running, and Hillary Clinton says I'm getting pressure to think about running. You know, the Democrats are hurting themselves, and I do not believe that any of this is an accident. I think that we have 25 candidates, not simply because you got 25 ambitious people, but because there's a conscious strategy afoot to try to ensure the advancement of a few of those candidates and hold back the rest. And it is going, if we continue down this road, it's going to hurt the Democrats. It's going to hurt them very bad. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that you have an ascendant left within the Democratic Party, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, and that all the rest of them really don't want to advance. Even Elizabeth Warren is now beginning to backtrack on Medicare for All, talking about I'm not going to implement it until the third year of my term if I'm elected president. Well, by the third year of your term, we might have a Republican
But let's be realistic
Congress.
about Medicare for All. You can't pass Medicare for All unless you get a Democratic Senate.
That's right.
You know, if the Senate is in Mitch McConnell's hands.
That's right.
You know, you're going to
nothing.
basically be dead on arrival. You look,
we also won't get Medicare for All if the party conspires to overwhelm, to suppress the genuine desire of the base of the party to have Medicare for All.
Look,
Bloomberg is in this
you
race
have to-
because he doesn't want tax. He doesn't want to lose the tax benefits that the billionaire class gets, and they don't want Medicare for all.
I want to say this about Medicare for All. And when I ran for Congress in 1990, first time I ran on a single payer system. But right now, if you poll Democratic primary voters, a majority of them are not for Medicare for All. Medicare for All is still a concept which is misunderstood and which has support and which also has detractors. What people want, and why I think there's some support for Medicare for All, they want a better health care system. They want a less expensive health care system. They want a health care system that works for everyone. And so they're going to grasp that. But here's the thing. This is my point. The issue in the general election is simple. It's Donald Trump. This is not an open race. This is a contest against an incumbent president. If you look at, we've had, the last time an incumbent president was beat, it was George W. Bush. Prior to that, it was Jimmy Carter. Prior to that, you got to go back to 1932. It's tough to beat an incumbent president, period, even an unpopular incumbent. So to me, the candidates should have a critique of Trumpism. They should have a narrative that says, why is this approach?
Absolutely.
Right, of
And then
course.
secondly, let me tell you about my approach. Not just talking about a single issue.
Absolutely.
Right? A single issue, as important as it is. That's my point of view. And it's, to some extent, what I hear when I circle the country. It's not a critique. It's about every debate. The central part of it has been health care. Good. We've heard about health care. It's an important discussion. Let's talk about criminal justice. Let's talk about education. Let's talk about the economy. Let's talk about income inequality. Let's talk about gentrification. Let's talk about those things. Let's talk about why your plan is distinct and different from what the Trump administration is doing or wants to do for the country.
I think most of the Democratic voters obviously are in support of that, right? And they're going to come out regardless of who the candidate is. But I think Larry has a great point in the sense that we always talk about this on the show, that the Democratic base is much more progressive and liberal than the establishment. And I think there's a real sense, especially among younger people, that their issues are always pushed to the wayside or their candidates are always suppressed. Like we talked about this in 2016 as well. And you're seeing that again with people like Bloomberg, with everybody coming in. And even with young folks, Lola, to your point earlier, when young people were pushing for issues that are of concern for people of color, that now suddenly there's a Klobuchar, there's a Buttigieg, the so-called quote-unquote moderates that are now saying, you know what, we may have gone too far left and we have to pull it back. And I think there's a lot of people who have an issue with that. And they feel as if, you know, yes, Donald Trump is the #1 focus. We want him out. But that doesn't mean that our issues should be pushed to the side or that our votes is discounted or that the party takes their votes
Here's
for
what
granted.
history
Well, that's the fight of the
Let me tell you
party
what-
right
But let me
now.
tell you what history teaches. History teaches that whoever the nominee is, whether they're from the progressive wing or the so-called moderate, they got to unite. Or
Right.
it's all an academic exercise. That's the challenge. And if you look, because I've watched the candidacies of Walter Mondale and Michael Dukakis fail. I've watched candidacies that were racked by division within the party, philosophical and ideological divisions within the party. And politics is a pragmatic game. It's about vision, it's about ideology, but it's also about pragmatics. And I think that whomever is the candidate, can they unite the party? Can they find a way to bring, the Democratic Party is a coalition. 2 governor's races were just won last week, Kentucky and Louisiana.
Yeah.
Both of those governors in those states won, and they're far more conservative than a Democratic candidate in a place like California or New York would need to be able to win. Every Democrat is not a New Yorker or a Californian. And people have to recognize that synthesizing all of the elements of the party is going to be the challenge of whomever. And if it's my way or the highway from the progressives or my way or the highway from the moderates, then you're going to nominate and you're going to have a friction. So my question to every single one of them would be, if you are not successful, will you support the nominee of the party without precondition?
Let me ask you this.
And I think that's a good question
I wanna just
and a
ask one
question
thing.
that should be asked. But my fear is not that Bernie Sanders is not going to support the party nominee. I'm going to support whoever the party nominates. I'm supporting Bernie Sanders right now, and that's no secret. My question is will the moderates support Bernie Sanders or Warren if they are the nominee? Because I think that right now the popular trend is with them. I think the popular trend is with the Democrat. And if we only are prisoners of pragmatism, we would never have had a New
It's a
Deal.
balance. It's not
We
being
would
prisoner of
never have
pragmatism.
had a Civil Rights Act.
Yeah,
We
but
would
it's-
never have had a Voting
Yeah,
Rights
but
Act.
it's-
We would
it's
never
not being a
have had
prisoner of
Medicare. It's only
not
when
being a prisoner of
people
pragmatism.
go and make
It's
bold
about-
moves do we make progress.
It's not about. It's not about being prisoner of pragmatism. It's about the fact that you got to win,
Right.
And that's what I want to make sure, in my point of view, because I've seen so many of these campaigns and so many of these candidacies, right? And I've seen the inability. The Democratic coalition is very broad. The inability to unify, and then people walk away and say, "I'm not going to participate. I'm really upset." And I think that is important. Elizabeth Sanders and Bernie Sanders are not the same person. One may have a better shot than the other. One may have broader appeal than the other. It really just depends.
moderates support them?
I don't speak for the moderates. I don't know. I don't
And
speak for the moderates. That's where the candidates. You know what this comes down to? It comes down to these candidates saying to their supporters, right? It comes down to not trying to incessantly leverage after you're not successful. After the primary voters make a decision, not trying to incessantly leverage yourself to try to cut deals. And so what I'm saying is, you run as a Democrat, whatever the Democratic voters say. If the Democratic voters say this is a candidate, everybody should get behind them.
Yeah, let me say this. And you mentioned dead on arrival, and I want to, before you leave, get into a little bit more of this impeachment. But as we see right now, the Republicans still seem to be unified. It looks like the House, extremely. Looks like the House will probably impeach Donald Trump. But of course, it looks like right now that it's going to be dead on arrival when it comes down to the Senate. Let's just say, hypothetically, let's just say there's a turn. There's a turn here. And the Republican Party sees that that Trump, even though the party's unified behind him, the Republican Party's unified behind him, that, hey, this may not be the right thing to do. All of a sudden, here comes Mitt Romney.
Yeah.
Here Mitt Romney comes. The Democratic Party has been so focused on Trump that now they got to turn their attention to Mitt Romney. And when you talked about would the moderates, support the liberal, the progressive side, and I think that this is the fight of the party inside the party. I don't know where the Democrats are going to be headed if this happens, if this turn happens.
I think that is going to happen. Or someone,
Yes,
Nikki
yes,
Haley or someone like that
yes.
is going to come in.
Yeah, because Mitt Romney looks like, because if he comes, he looks honestly like a moderate to Donald
to
Trump. And he comes in where the party is unified, and he makes sense that the Democrats, if they're not unified, can they even beat a Republican
I've
candidate
often
like
wondered, you know what I've often wondered? I've often wondered if when it gets into the Senate, if a group of senators, Republican senators, look up and say, you know what, we're better off if Donald Trump's not leading our ticket.
I think that's going to happen. I think that some are going to turn against him. Yeah.
You think so?
You really
Yeah,
think that
the
could
reason
happen?
why is because if you look at what's been happening, so Trump is very convinced that everyone has his back. I'm not convinced that everybody does. I think they've been staying silent because they want to win. If they start to see that their voters are also having questions, and some of the testimony from the impeachment here, well, so far has been so damning that it's just difficult to argue against it. Then it becomes an issue not just of party, but actually, your conscience as a Republican, and if you really are a patriot for real. And I think there are a few who will say, actually, I'm really not sure about this guy.
Yeah, but you're going on logic.
I'm completely going on logic, but I said,
My point is
No,
that
he's saying
The
that
you're
his-
going on logic,
Yeah.
and it's reasonable, but the Republicans are not at this point dealing with logic. They're dealing with emotions.
but if they
And-
have another candidate, though, then
but
then
see,
there's
but
the
Trump,
potential.
Money speaks loud.
Yeah, I just want to say,
Trump has a lot of
Mark
money.
Murray
and he's
got
throwing
to run. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark.
Bye.
Thank you, Mark.
Bye.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay.
So
Reiterate.
Right. The thing is,
Reiterate your point.
so I've been.
just a quick one. So we knew Mark was going to go, and I was trying to squeeze in there. So I did see the questions you had, and I was going to ask about for him to give his point of view on. He has a lawsuit with Byron Allen. People want to know, and the Comcast piece out there. So apologies for it if we get Mark again. We'll ask him. Sorry, Lola.
What I was going to say is, so everything I've predicted so far has happened. And the reason why is because, I'm not saying I'm some sort of clairvoyant or anything like that, but I think that there are a few, basically, if Trump is the only candidate, Republicans will stick with him. I believe that if they think there could potentially be other options that could beat him and they can put another Republican candidate option in, they might dump him.
That's right.
Because he's becoming a liability. And if apparently they can have secret impeachment ballots, if they do that, then that gives the opportunity for Republicans to vote in secret and not put their necks on the line.
Right.
That also gives an opportunity for them to get Trump out. But they have to have somebody they think is credible, which I think could be a Mitt Romney,
Right.
could be a Nikki Haley, who apparently is eyeing that as well. But I don't think it's as in the bag as Trump thinks it is, and I think that there could be a turn of events. That's just my.
I think that would only
prediction.
happen if his supporters start to leave him. And unfortunately, like I always say, they're like a cult where no matter what he does, the majority of them are sticking with him. So until that starts to chip away, I think some of those other potential candidates would just be too hesitant to come out and do that. I don't know.
Right.
That's
I just want to go
mine.
back to Larry, just to answer your question. My opinion, no, the moderates are not going to. They're not going to do it overwhelmingly, they may do it reluctantly for the party. I just
So,
right now.
so the moderates would rather lose the election than support Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren.
I think that
That's a damning comment on the Democratic Party.
It is. It is. But if you look at all these Johnny-come-latelys that are coming in this race, what message is that sending?
Exactly. I agree with you. I think there's a real problem. I don't know what Joe Biden did to piss some of these people off, but that's who they're going to hurt. Bloomberg coming into the race is not going to hurt Sanders, not going to hurt Warren. It's going to hurt all those other candidates who see themselves as moderate, as center to right. That's who Bloomberg is going to take votes from. That's who Bain Capital, Patrick Duval is going to take votes from. That's who Silent Sam, Eric Holder is going to take people
But
from.
they realize that Biden is not a
He's
strong
not a strong,
candidate.
yeah,
That's the problem.
exactly.
That's why they're coming in. That's why I said if Deval Patrick. I said last week, and I thought that if you wanted to get in, you should have got in earlier.
Right.
But I just see that they realize that Biden is slipping. And if you notice that this investigation now by Lindsey Graham on Biden, if let's just say Biden wins, that this investigation will probably go into his term, and he
the Republicans will make sure it goes.
they will try to do what they did to President Obama towards his
it's,
term.
It's a setup as well. The whole Ukrainian thing was supposed to be dirt on Biden, and actually, by the fact that it's all kind of there, they can spin that to still have dirt on Biden. It have the same end result
if he wins as president, and basically limit his reach and what he can do, and especially if we don't flip the Senate. If we don't flip the Senate and keep the House.
You know, it's very curious. Elizabeth Warren is from Massachusetts, and Patrick Duval is coming in the race as the former governor of Massachusetts. It's very curious, you know.
Mitt Romney, Massachusetts.
And Mitt Romney, Massachusetts also. You know, it's very curious that New York has one of the highest number of Democratic Party delegates, and now Bloomberg is entering the race. There are so many candidates in the Democratic primary, it almost looks as if there is a state-by-state correlation to voting delegates. I said some time ago that it seemed that the vector that we're on is that they're trying to move toward a brokered convention. They want to create a situation where neither Bernie Sanders nor Elizabeth Warren can get 50% of the votes on the first ballot, and somehow there's a crisis and they can, at the convention, remember, Hubert Humphrey did not run in the Democratic primary.
My boss.
He became
I was waiting for your cue. We were waiting for your cue, Bob.
He became the nominee in a brokered convention because because LBJ had withdrawn. He said he wasn't running for re-election. No other candidate within the convention could get a majority of delegates. They picked Hubert Humphrey at the convention, and I believe that this is where, and you know, the people of this country want a better life. They don't want rent that they can't afford. They don't want wages that can't support their families. They don't want to be without health care. They want to, it's not just about dumping Trump. Yes, I, more than anybody else, have been advocating. My organization has had a demonstration every year since Trump was elected calling for his impeachment, but it's not just about getting rid of Trump. It's about making a better life for people. Remember, Trump was elected on a populist platform. He was running around here talking about clearing the swamp and I'm going to create jobs and all of these things, which he's not doing.
Infrastructure, all of that.
But he had crafted his platform to deceive people into believing that he was going to get them a better life. And it's about having a better life as well as defeating Trump.
Let me say, Larry, your assessment is excellent and right on point. Having been there and having been an aide to the vice president at the time, your assessment. It's very accurate.
And remember what the caveat is. The caveat is Hubert Humphrey lost.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's the caveat.
Right.
If they do a brokered convention, they will lose.
Yep. And you're right, Larry. We found out just this week, too, that I believe it's since 2001, we have spent $6.4 trillion on fighting war overseas. And people want that money invested in our country here instead of being spent on endless wars. And that's another part of this, too.
Absolutely.
I just don't think that, going back to see what happened with Bernie Sanders and how he was treated, I just figured that this fight was coming, and it's here. It's here, that the moderates are not just going to let the party go, and the progressives feel that, look, we got our foot in the door now. We're going full steam ahead, and this is going to be a fight, and I don't know. I think the casualty may be the 2020 Democratic election.
I mean, in a sort of ideal way, what should happen is that those top candidates should get together and say, okay, let's pick which one we're going to go behind, and the rest of us will drop out. And actually unify amongst themselves.
Yeah, but I don't think that's going to happen.
I mean, it's never going to happen.
Right.
But,
Well, I'm not saying it's not going to happen. It's just that
it's not going to happen.
I think a lot of people, especially looking back at Obama, when he first ran, that he was polling at like about 3% before Iowa. And then all of a sudden, once he got that momentum, again, we didn't have all these candidates, but once he got that momentum, then you saw where that went. So
yeah, but even another example, right, which is when Tom Perez was nominated, right, and everybody felt Keith Ellison got jerked out of the deal, right, and just Keith Ellison tried to come out and show his support, but really, did anybody believe that he was 100% behind it, right? You just didn't, right? And so, I just think it's going to continue to be splintered.
Yeah, it's going to continue to be splintered. So I just don't know where it's going to go. But just coming back and just to get your thoughts on this, because I had threw it out there earlier, the Iowa poll is there's hardly any blacks there. So that poll is white. So it's not a reflection of the country, but it worries me now with Joe Biden slipping, okay, and now the Democrats are questioning Warren. A lot of the donors are saying, and you wasn't here last week, but it was brought up, that a lot of the donors are cringing that if Warren wins the nomination, a lot of the donors are saying, we don't know if we're going to be there.
Right, but one of the things we just got to remember, right, which is why so much gerrymandering has been taking place the last few years, is because we've always talked about New York and California, the liberals' bookends right there, and in Middle America, the Rust Belt, and all those things. But what's been happening is, for a better life, Larry, you're finding more black and Hispanics who are moving into more of these rural areas, like Pennsylvania, we talked about before. They are actually moving into those areas that are causing some people to freak out, which why they want to do gerrymandering. So we saw what happened in the last election, which is he won on the electoral, not the populist. And so there is a belief that you're starting to see, and I'm not saying Iowa is the model of it, but you are seeing some black and Hispanics who are moving into some of these areas that is causing some people to. So I don't discount 100% Iowa. I don't think they have the mass yet. But you always got to remember the electoral vote is the difference. And where we start to see you have some mass migrations where other views and more progressive views are, we had this story last year in California when you just saw parts of California that have been, while it's a liberal state, you're starting to see the tide turn in some of those more conservative areas where there are a lot of Asians who lived in there. And what did we see there? Were younger Asians who now are saying, well, I've been in America. Only thing I know is America. I don't want to follow the path of my conservative parents and grandparents who they bit their tongue because of, the internment camps and the way Asians were treated. So they kowtowed to the conservatives. So you're starting to see this demographic change out there, which I think the Republicans see, and it may also be showing up in there. And what Mark said, right, which is 1 out of 4 votes is a black vote. So if that black vote is moving, geographically, it could have an impact.
Yep. Now, I just want to concentrate on one thing. Last week, it broke after we left, is that it came out that former Mayor Mike Bloomberg speaks at Pastor A.R. Bernard's church out there in Brooklyn, CCC, and he gets up there and he apologizes for stop and frisk. And there was a situation where we had Michael Bloomberg on OpenLine, and I give Michael Bloomberg credit on some things. Of course, I'm not giving him no credit on stop and frisk, but I do give him credit for having an open door policy. He's come on OpenLine. He talked about the Timothy Stansbury shooting, which was a bad shoot. Not only did he go see the parents, he paid for the funeral. He came on OpenLine with the police commissioner back then, Bob Pickett, with you, Toomey, and Slade. But for us to, you really take us to how can black folks even think about supporting you where this stop and frisk? But the point I was bringing up is we had a discussion during the commercial break when Michael Bloomberg was in the studio, and I pulled out my wallet. And I showed him, not just a PBA card, but I showed him a miniature detective badge that I carry, of someone that is family. And I said, I have to carry this because I'm a black man here in the city. Wow. At that time, Mayor Mike Bloomberg, his exact words, I don't believe that. That's not true. That's not true. I turned to his deputy mayor, Dennis Walcott. I said, your deputy mayor lives on the other side of me in Queens. Dennis turned to Mayor Bloomberg and said, it's true. Mm-hmm. So then, you didn't believe it then. Now, all of a sudden, you're running for president and you're on the Democratic ticket, and now you come out and talk about that you was wrong on stop and frisk?
What gets me about it, right, which is how did he make his money? So his company, Bloomberg, which is dealing in facts, right? So they do research, they do facts. When he put stop and frisk in, he leaned in and said, this will be fact-based.
Right.
But what he failed to do was actually understand the facts. And so we all know you can have facts manipulate a story, but as time went on, the facts showed a different story that he just refused to acknowledge, right? Mm-hmm. So while there was a higher percentage of black and Latino men, young boys, who were stopped and frisked, the percentage of white men who were stopped and frisked yielded a higher percentage of drugs and weapons.
Yeah. Wow. Yep.
So, but that fact never made it to the headline. Wow. And this is him advocating facts. So I just found it disingenuous that now that you run in, you're now going to say, my bad, I'm sorry, and just think we're going to take it and roll over.
Right.
Yeah.
And I just want to say real quick that de Blasio caught flack. He caught flack from the police department because not only did he run against stop and frisk, he ran up to Reverend Sharpton's, and he was up there at the National Action Network speaking out against stop and frisk and implementing that he was going to bring in a police commissioner and he was going to put the pressure on the police commissioner to deter stop and frisk. Now, as you look at crime has come down, stop and frisk is not as prevalent. A lot of people said it hasn't totally gone away, but it's not as prevalent as it once was before. And Bloomberg got a lot of heat from the police union and the police department. They turning their backs on him. He's not supportive, but he took a lot of heat because he came out against stop and frisk.
Well, I mean, the thing is that, it's one thing to apologize, but my thing is, okay, if you're sorry, what would you do differently? Mm-hmm. And so it's easy now in hindsight for him to say, well, I made a mistake and blah, blah, blah. That's fine. You're running for president. So we know the reason why you're doing that. But what would you do differently to address issues relating to black people? What would you do relating, the relationship between the police and the black community? That's what I want to know.
Yeah. So we got a couple of comments here.
Okay,
Sorry. Former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg won't get support from black people. In 2001, he ran as a Republican. Gentrification, stop and frisk, and other bad policies starting under his administration. Diane Stefan said Bloomberg is part of the reason why living in New York is so expensive, especially
true.
in Brooklyn, where he apologized. He won't get my vote for dog catcher.
Yeah, and not only that, let's remember also Wall Street and the money that they accumulated while he was also in office. But going back to the stop and frisk, so I actually wrote a piece in, I think it was 2013, and it was called "If Only Billionaires Were Stopped and Frisked." So I just want to read. I was pulling it up. So so the number of stops of young black men exceeded the entire population of young black men in the city, aka they were stopped more than once. And according to the New York Civil Liberties Union, a weapon, Bobby, to your point, was only found in 1.8% of blacks and Latinos who were frisked. Meanwhile, a weapon was found in 3.8% of whites who were frisked.
Wow.
And that was left out of most of the conversation.
Yeah, but those are facts.
Facts.
Right.
Bloomberg.
Bloomberg is an oligarch.
Yeah.
He is an American oligarch who is attempting to fuse both political power and economic power. If you're a man with $56 billion in wealth, why would you want that headache? Why would you want to be a mayor, a congressperson, a senator, or a president? It is because you have a megalomaniacal desire to have power. Power both in the economic sphere and power both in the political sphere. And while it does sound humorous, I am deadly serious about this. And one of the key characteristics of fascism is, in fact, the fusion of economic, political, and military power. That is the axis upon which fascism sits.
Right. I just want to bring up something because I know.
I got to get this in because Edward Latson, we know, always has something funny. So I was showing Lola this. So to our comments earlier about Iowa poll, Edward wrote in there, Iowa's whiter than marshmallows in milk.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. I'm turning. Matter of fact, I don't even have it on here, but there was something that caught my eye last week. And hopefully, Bobby, we didn't even talk about this, but hopefully you can explain this because, I don't want to start insulting black folks, but I'm tired of black folks getting up there and seem like they have to do the bidding of white folks. That bothers me. I look at you dead in the camera. I don't stutter my words on that. And the whole thing with the Colin Kaepernick, and then I look at, briefly I'm turning through ESPN and I'm seeing where, and you can explain this better, Bobby, where I'm seeing the commentator, a white guy, taking up more for Colin Kaepernick at that particular time than Stephen A. Smith. Then during a lot of part of the week, I see Stephen A. Smith talking about he's a black man and a black man in America. And now he seems like, to me, he came out against Colin Kaepernick. He's feeling the heat. People are saying white folks stand taller than you on black issues than you as a black man. So if we'd like you to kind of straighten this out here.
So last week we talked about Colin because last weekend he had the tryout. He changed the venue, and we talked about that. But that same day, actually the Saturday, I want to say, Stephen A. went out, live streamed his views of it, right? And some of our viewers had commented about it. It was not a positive, favorable one. He basically came out and said Colin doesn't really want to play football because if he did, he wouldn't have did what he did by changing the venue, blah, blah, blah. So Stephen, in his Stephen-like way, histrionics and all of that, he just went off. Now, Jamie and I had talked about this a lot during the week, and one of the things we realized about Stephen A. Smith, right? So when we first met Stephen was a journalist, right? He was a sports reporter, and the true definition is you went, did your homework, you got your facts, and you then reported on it.
Correct.
What Stephen has evolved into is an opinionated entertainer, and so he's quick to just put out a headline. And when you do that, you get burned. Right. So now he's taken more heat than I think he's ever imagined because some of his comments just don't make sense. Right. But him to say, well, he really doesn't want to work in it. How do you know? As we've talked about before, you've never even spoken to the man. right? A sports reporter or any reporter would attempt to get a comment, and if they can't, they would say, and we reached out and didn't get it. None of that. He is just blowing off his opinion. So now what happened is he had a show on ESPN, First Take. He has a counterpart, Max Kellerman, who is white. And Max came out a couple of days later and actually had a little bit more facts because more information came out from when Stephen first did his live stream to when Max was on the air. And so Max weaved that in.
Yes.
And so it showed a more balanced opinion as to what happened. Former NFL player Terrell Owens is on that show, and he said that Max sounded blacker than Stephen A.
That's right.
So Stephen gets all upset about that, and during the week, Stephen's like, how can you say that? That's crazy. Everything. I'm black, and he starts to come across as very defensive, talking about all the issues that he's faced as a black man that Max and other white people would have never encountered to justify that there. But to me, it all started because he signed a big contract. You know, there was a story years ago when he really put his own voice out there, and the studio and the station said, whoa, he got suspended. He had to backtrack a bit on things. And ever since that moment, you just see a different type of edge, right? You still see the fire,
Right.
but the content of what he's spewing
That's right.
has been tempered down. And then you look at a Jamel Hill, who she didn't back down when she was on ESPN.
Right.
And they kept trying to suspend her, and, you know, the president went after and all that stuff there. And she just said, no, I'm standing behind who I am.
Correct.
So she left, and she's now working at the Atlantic.
I think Atlantic.
The Atlantic.
Yeah.
You know, so Stephen, you know, he just signed this big, you know, $8 million a year contract and everything. So he's taking a lot of heat, and he is doing the Michael Jackson moonwalk right now.
There you go. There you go. And that's why, you know, we had I got to be careful with the words I use, but if we had
Someone just called Stephen A. Uncle Ruckus.
that's what I'm saying. We had an Uncle Ruckus house to put you in. I had a stronger word, but I'll use Uncle Ruckus today, buddy. You know, that's where he would go. You know, and Stephen A. Smith has been a friend. He's been a friend, and I'm not saying he's not a friend now. It's just that, you know, and I thought about giving him a call, but since he's signed this ESPN deal, it seems that ESPN has tied his hands on going on a lot of different media at times. But I'm going to reach out. You know, I have a good relationship with his sister. You know, anytime I had to book him on Reverend Sharpton's show or our show, so I'll reach out to him, see if he wants to come on and talk. You know, and we'll talk about this, because at the end of the day, you summed that up very well. That, you know, when a journalist writing for
Daily
the
News, the Philadelphia Inquirer.
he really brought his game. He brought his A game. But now, like you said, a lot of this has become entertainment.
Yeah.
But you got to realize that you have built your reputation on great journalism values. So people expect that going forward. And for you to come out and just rip a person.
And this has been going on for a few years now, right? So he had this issue with Kevin Durant where he attributed certain things that Kevin Durant said, never spoke to Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant came out and said, I never spoke to the man. He's making this up.
Right.
And then he gets on the air and he starts he's saying, well, you know, I talked to people close to Kevin. I never said I spoke to Kevin, right? But the way you present that story was like you have firsthand knowledge. And because in his past, he did have firsthand knowledge. Right. He was very tight with Allen Iverson. So when he would break stories, it was a lot from firsthand account. Right. And so now he's tried to position things as though he still is that insider. He's had issues with Carmelo Anthony where he's tried to say that things about Carmelo, and Carmelo said, we've never even had a conversation.
I mean, this is an issue in journalism in general, and how journalism has morphed as social media has become bigger, whereby people are moving away from facts to opinion. Right. And of course, you can have opinion based on facts, but if you're doing journalism entertainment, then people want to be the personality. They want to say wild things. They want to be provocative, which is that has its place, but not when people are looking to you as a trusted source,
Right.
and not when you actually can affect people's lives, or
like
careers.
Fox, right? So Hannity this
Exactly.
week, right? As they do the breakdown of the impeachment, it was just atrocious the way that he positioned Fiona Hill, right, to minimize her contribution, take a 2-second clip of a word she said and ignore the other 99% of what she said. And remember, he's someone who last year or the year before came out and said, I am not a journalist,
Yeah.
right? He is exactly what you said,
Exactly.
right? I am an entertainer. But yet you're on Fox News primetime influencing, which still boggles my mind how their ratings continue to be strong and rise, which to me is an indication as to the truth that's going on around the United States,
And
because
it's
they
not-
continue to win ratings.
Yeah, it's not only him too. It's Tucker Carlson. It's Laura Ingraham.
I mean,
it's,
do you
it's
watch
all
it?
of them.
Do you watch Fox ever?
I do watch it just to understand the
Right.
opposite lunacy that's going on.
Yeah, it's a completely different reality.
It's another world.
mean,
It's
it
another
really
world.
is.
And but I thought it was interesting that what's his name, Shep Smith, quit and is actually donating a ton of money to the Committee to Protect Journalists.
Journalists,
And I was
exactly.
like, well, that's fascinating.
Well, I do know that a couple folks have to run, so we're going to pretty much wind down. But my eye opener for the week, and the reason that I call it an eye opener is that there's been so many stories in the news, from the impeachment to the debate and a couple of other stories, that some of these stories you got a blip out there. But this is something I say as an eye opener that we must watch going forward. And there have been at least 4 hate incidents reported on college campuses this week. And here in this area,
Syracuse
yeah.
University.
So I break it down. I'll start first in the University of Georgia, where swastikas at the residence halls on the campus of the University of Georgia. Students, Ariana Denberg, said someone tore off her historically Jewish sorority letters from her residence hall door twice in September. At that time, she wasn't sure it was someone targeting Jews. Later, someone wrote on the whiteboard on her door, "All hail," with a swastika underneath it. So that was motivated. Then in Iowa State, another swastika and racist stickers was used. Then, as you all mentioned, Syracuse University, racist graffiti targeting different groups took place. And this is so interesting. There is a gentleman, I need help on his name real quick. If he was a professor. He was a professor at he used to come on Reverend Sharpton's show with glasses.
Boyce Watkins.
Boyce Watkins. Boyce Watkins.
he
Boyce
teaches
Watkins.
at Syracuse, right?
He used to.
Yeah.
So when Boyce taught at the university, you got to realize Boyce was starting to make the circuit, television circuit, the media circuit, the black circuit, on a lot of issues, and he said it with fact and he said it with fire. And he called me one day and said, "Fatim, they're coming at me. They're coming at me." And they came at him, and they got him out of Syracuse. So when this happened, I thought of him. I meant to call him, but just got to a busy week. And then you had at the University of Wisconsin, EAU Clare, there was some racist social posts. But if you go back to Syracuse and all these campuses, but I look at Syracuse, is that the students are protesting, and they feel like that how they have been dealing with this has been a slap on the wrist, and that they want more action done. And if it's not going to be done, they said that they will shut it down.
And you know what's curious about those schools? Because I didn't even know about all those schools, but they sit in conservative areas, right?
Yeah.
Iowa State,
Yes.
Georgia, upstate New York. I mean,
Correct.
those are all conservative places.
Yes.
And instead, the young kids get demonized by people saying that, oh, they want safe spaces. Well, yes, they want to be able to live and go to school in a
Without being
safe
abused.
environment.
Exactly.
Exactly.
I mean, there's been a rise in hate crime in general.
Correct.
And, okay, who's Trump appealing to and his people? Yes, to maybe people of his own age and stuff, but to the future. He's trying to create a culture shift. He doesn't want progressive demographic change and people wanting to be. He doesn't want that. Correct. He wants the people to be racist. So some people are picking up on it and they're going with it. That's right. Unfortunately,
and people are starting to see the power of protest. And just look at the fight in Hong Kong. I mean, people are standing up.
There are protests everywhere, from like Lebanon to Haiti to Iraq to you name it. There are protests all over the world right now.
That's right, and people are standing up. So that's just my eye opener this week. Larry, you had an event that we promoted for the past 3 weeks.
Yes, thank you.
And last night you attended this event, and let me just say this: this past week, Reverend Sharpton spoke at Harvard University, and he put a clip out on Twitter.
Yeah, Cornell mentioned that.
Yeah, Cornell was sitting next to him. That. And Reverend Sharpton said this, and then I thought it was so important. He said to Professor Cornell West, he said that he goes back to Mayor Dinkins here in New York, how when Mayor Dinkins was mayor, he was critical at times of Mayor Dinkins. And he said he helped create a climate that went to create a person to come in that was worse than what we had with Mayor Dinkins. So he said when it came to President Obama, he said that he made that pledge. He would never do that again. So that's why he said, and he said it right there, I was a supporter of President Obama. No ifs, ands, and buts about it. But he said, I didn't want to create another climate that would create something worse, which we have now, where after Obama we have Trump, and Cornell was sitting right there, and he was in agreement. That's all the clip I saw. But I just say this to say this, so you can go into that. Is that I said to Reverend Sharpton, you have to speak out and bring these folks on, so the rest of the folks can hear this, because people are looking like you're not on the same page. We didn't get a chance to ask Mark those questions as you talked about Comcast. Mark wasn't even on this schedule to be on this show. So he did not run from it. He didn't even know. I asked him to come on. He said he had 10 minutes. He gave us 20 or 25 minutes, and I thanked him for that. But they have to speak to. Reverend Sharpton has spoke to this Comcast. Puffy came out this week about Comcast, and we're going to talk more about this. But Larry, I took time from you. Go ahead, my brother.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for pushing, advertising, letting people know about the program we had yesterday with Cornell West at Rutgers University in Newark. It was a very successful. You see there two of the student leaders, the young black woman, her name is Asada Man, and the young man, she is the head of the College Democrats of Rutgers University, and the young man standing next to her is Dylan Terpstra. He is the president of the Student Government Association. The program was sponsored by the People's Organization for Progress, but it was made possible by the co-sponsorship of those two organizations. Those two organizations enabled us to come onto the campus and have the program at the campus and have it in the Gold Dome Athletic Center, which is rarely used for anything other than athletics. But we needed the Gold Dome because 400 people came out yesterday. It was a very good crowd. Yes, and Cornell spoke. Even Governor Murphy showed up. Governor Murphy showed up, said a few words. Ross Baraka showed up. There's Ross sitting up on the stage.
Who's that guy in the yellow shirt?
That's me. Wearing my colors, Right. And so it was a great program. And Cornell spent the entire afternoon. I mean, and I don't know if I should be putting his business out like this, but he spoke pro bono. He did not charge a dime. He wouldn't even let me pay for his airfare. He did this out of his heart, And when he could, he gets top level speaking fees. He didn't charge a dime. He got to the program, the doors didn't open until 12 noon. He got to the school at 11. He didn't leave until 5 o'clock.
Wow.
He spoke for about an hour. This was billed as a town hall meeting. About 20 people got to ask questions, and he stayed for the whole Q&A, and then he stayed after to interact with all the student volunteers
That's nice.
that worked, on the floor and on the door and everywhere else, get pictures with them because they were volunteering, and that was a way of giving respect to them. So it was a wonderful event. I really want to thank, and there was another group that was key, and that's a group of young brothers. They call themselves Black Voters for Bernie. They were the ones that actually made the connection between People's Organization for Progress and the student organization. But I'm going to tell you something. Cornell is controversial. I don't have to tell y'all that. I was having a hard time finding a place to have the program. People were saying like, no. They were saying like, well, I got something else scheduled. So these brothers stepped forward. Their names are Gerald Jackson and Justin Dillard. And they're with Black Voters for Bernie. They said, look, we're going to make contact with the student groups on campus. And they did. And they made it happen. Those young people made it happen. And Gerald and Dylan, they work with a fellow in that same group, Dr. Matthew Johnson. But it was a wonderful event. And I think the outcome of this is you're going to see increased student activism on the Rutgers-Newark campus, because Rutgers-Newark, unlike New Brunswick, is more of a commuter college. It's not like New Brunswick where people live on the campus, organized. There's not a lot of activism, but I think you're going to see that.
Right.
All right. Bob, where's your mic? Where's your mic?
Yeah. This,
There you
I'm looking at some of these comments, and somebody had mentioned, Pat Johnson asks, where are the Black Syracuse alumni? Where are they? And, I don't, when you type and we read it, sometimes it can be taken one way, and sometimes we look at that and we'll say, are they questioning the Black alumni? And maybe they are. We're going to reach out to the Syracuse. They're going to have to reach out to them.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people, and I say this, and I said it last week, and I'll say it again. There's a lot of radio revolutionaries and now social media revolutionaries. You talk a lot, and you don't do nothing.
Yeah.
You don't do nothing. And you want to sit out here and you want to criticize, oh, this one signed this and this one did that. You don't even walk the shoes a lot of these brothers and sisters walk out here. And you don't even know all the facts, but you are so quick to criticize. And I just think that you need, what we try to do here on this platform is bring folks on so that we can give you more information. And I'll reach out to the Syracuse folks, but there's so much news things that is happening that I get calls for team. We need to talk about housing. We need to talk about this, healthcare. It's so many things that we just run out of time to talk about. And then there's so many problems that we're talking about that it was a breath of fresh air last week when we brought Will Downing in to talk about R&B music, in which that's something that we got to have a conversation on. Yeah. So it's just so many issues that that affect our community, and so many people want to talk about. So we do.
But before we wrap up, I want to put.
Sorry to get on my soapbox, but I just get tired of people criticizing.
It's great to have Lola here again, and Lola was sharing with me a little thing that you might want to plug. So what you did down your TV show, the TV piece there.
Oh, right. Thanks. TV1 has a network called Clio TV, which is for millennial Black women. And they have a series called Clio Speaks, which is a series of episodes. Each episode showcases a Black woman, entrepreneurs, one of the women that founded the Black Lives Matter movement, all sorts. And I was featured on one of the episodes. And so that came out earlier in the year, but this week, Spectrum hosted my episode in Florida in front of a live audience, and we watched it, and then we had a panel discussion with Yandy Smith and another social media influencer, and some congresswomen came, and it was really, really amazing. And we just talked about you know, black girl magic and stuff going on in the world. And so yeah, just wanted to let you know.
That's
And my
fantastic.
episode is available.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank
Lola
you.
It's on
at a
demand.
show,
Leo
yeah.
TV.
Lola
Come
on demand.
There
That's
you
good.
go, Lola at a show, yeah.
Yeah.
There you go. I told you, I got it. I got it down, you know. And let me just say my little disclaimer because TV One is part of. They changed their name, Urban One.
Yeah.
Which I also am employed by them when I do Reverend Sharpton's nationally syndicated radio show. Keeping it real with Al Sharpton during the week. So I just want to make that disclaimer. Is there anything else before we wrap up, folks? We're not doing a 2-hour show today.
I think it's a good discussion.
It's all good. It's all
That's
good.
it. All right.
Keep the
So,
faith. Keep
Yes.
fighting.
So
Yes.
thank you all again for tuning in on your Sunday morning. Again, as Fatim said, if we get Mark back in here, we will definitely ask the questions. If you have followed us for a while, you know we don't shy away
Nope.
from
He's-
asking us
he's-
questions.
He's back. He's scheduled back next month on the on-air program.
And so we'll make sure we do that. And, you know, in honoring what Bob Slade had put in place here, Bob would never allow us to not have a guest be accountable and ask those questions. And we ask them in a factful way. So in the words of Bob Slade, get your mind right and keep a good thought.
There you go. And one more thing I said last week, and I know you got to go, but I do end the show like this. Remember, the greatest tragedy in life is not death, but rather living with a purpose. Without a purpose, life has no meaning, no significance, no hope. It's activity without direction, events without reason, just pointless. And most of all, life becomes motion without any true meaning. So live your life to the fullest, a life of purpose and meaning. Thank you. We'll see you next week. God bless.
Next week.
Thank you.
That's a good show.